This is Claudia's O'Reilly Auto Parts story.
I had just moved to a new city and barely even knew where the grocery store was yet. When my car wouldn't start one morning, I didn't know who to ask about local shops. But I remembered a name from back home, O'Reilly Auto Parts. I called and they pointed me to a great mechanic just down the street. Now, I feel a little more at home.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
You know, the rest of our life, the rest of my life is going to be a world of comparison. And I have to figure out kind of how to make that comparison work in my advantage. And just understand that there are some people that are going to be great at things, and we need to stand in awe of their blessing, right? And look at the better things that they are putting out in the world that may not be my jam, but to know that they are also looking at me in the same way.
Do you believe in hope? 'Cause I am hopeless. Do you believe in love? 'Cause I'm alone. Do you believe in hell? 'Cause I am hell.
Welcome to the Deconstructionists podcast. I'm your host, John Williamson. I want to give you guys a bit of an update. If you listened to the last episode, obviously trying to give some background information on why the episodes have been coming out a little bit more slowly than usual. So I'm usually pretty good at handling a lot of things happening simultaneously, but even for me, this is a bit much. Both my parents are kind of in ill health right now. They're both chugging along, but my mom just had pretty major cancer surgery and is in the process of recovering before she's due to start her chemotherapy to hopefully get rid of anything that may remain. But having some kind of bumps in the road along the way and kind of dealing with those. My dad, not to be outdone, also needs to have some pretty major heart surgery, and so that has not been scheduled yet, but is going to be happening fairly soon. So lots going on with my parents, and then as I was getting ready to go up to stay with them while my mom was getting ready to have surgery, I got COVID a second time because I didn't have enough on my plate at that point, and I thought I want to get the high score at life right now. So second round of that, and then finally was able to recover. Timing wise, it worked out okay. I got to go up with my daughter and spend some time with my folks and return the favor of all those years of taking care of me. It was kind of nice to be able to go up and cook and help out and stuff. So if you could keep my parents in your thoughts, your prayers, your good vibes, whatever. And yeah, just lots going on. So all that being said, this is the last episode I have recorded at the moment. And so more than likely going to take September off so that I can, obviously deal with the life stuff, but also have some episodes that are being scheduled as we speak. And so in an effort to be able to not overwhelm myself and also get you guys content for the rest of the year, I'm just going to take it kind of slow for now. But what a good episode to end on before I take a slight hiatus. This one recorded a while ago and been excited to release it. So Tyler Merritt, if you don't know who he is, I don't know where you've been. The man just does a little bit of everything. He's just a jack of all trades and just one of those people you meet where you're like, this guy's amazing, just a kind human being. And just funny and just fun to talk to. And we had such a good conversation. Talked for a while before we even started recording. Just a genuinely good human being. And so if you haven't seen his videos that have made him famous, he had a couple that went viral, including the big one, Before You Call the Cops, that was also showed on Jimmy Kimmel. And he runs the Tyler Merritt Project. He's involved in a whole host of other things. So let me just read you his bio. I think this one's worth hearing. So Tyler Merritt is an actor, musician, comedian, and activist behind the Tyler Merritt Project. Raised in Los Angeles, he has always had a passion for bringing laughter, grace, and love into any community that he is able to be a part of. For over 20 years now, he has spoken to audiences ranging from elementary school students to nursing home seniors. His television in credits, let me try that again. His television credits include ABC's Kevin Probably Saves the World, Netflix's Messiah, Netflix's Outer Banks, Disney Marvel's Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and Apple TV's upcoming series Swagger. Tyler's viral videos Before You Call the Cops and Walking While Black have been viewed by over 60 million people worldwide, with Before You Call the Cops being voted the #1 most powerful video of 2020 by Now This Politics. He is a cancer survivor who lives in Nashville, Tennessee, and just an all-around amazing human being. I had the pleasure of listening to the audio version of his book. Typically, I read the book. For those of you guys who've listened to the podcast for years know that I love a hard copy, so I can highlight it and write notes in it. But this time I was told, like, you really got to get the audiobook. It's something special. And I'm telling you, it is unlike any audiobook I've ever heard. We talk about that in the interview, but he really just brings life into this thing. It's not like your typical, like, we've hired a guy with a cool British accent to read the words that somebody else wrote. No, he narrates his own story, and really it feels like he's telling you his life story. It's got beautiful moments in it all throughout. He'll bring you to tears, also make you laugh and everything in between. It's just an incredibly well-produced audiobook. So highly recommend. But if you got to read it, obviously the book itself is amazing too. So check it out. Follow the work that Tyler does, and you know all the scoop. So, and where to find everything. Website is updated, www.thedeconstructionists.com. It's got everything you need to know about the podcast on there and all the links to everything. So if you want to support us, you can find links to support us with through that website. Otherwise, rate and review us if you could. Subscribe so you don't miss a new episode. And thank you to everybody who listens to the podcast and supports in any way that you can. Especially love the emails and the messages. Really appreciate the support. So thank you guys. And without further ado, I give you Tyler freaking Merritt.
I found myself and no one's left to tell my tale. My ship has sunk to my surprise.
Welcome to the podcast, and I really appreciate it, man. I know we had some schedule stuff this morning, but thanks so much for being on today.
Yo, we are going to have a good time. This is going to be the best podcast you have ever had in your life, John.
I feel that. I do. I think that's true. Well, tell people a little bit. Obviously, you've got a bunch of stuff going on, but tell people a little bit about your background and what you do.
Sure, man. I guess it's simply put, I'm an actor, activist, author, and I say that I am a full-time encourager, which I hope to be, and a lover of all people as much as I possibly can be. But right now, probably the forefront of my life is my book, I Take My Coffee Black, that's out. Reflections on Tupac, musical theater, faith, and being black in America. So if you're listening and you can't see or there's no pictures, I'm a black man. I'm a beautiful, black, cocoa-colored, mocha-like, dreadlocked with salt and pepper, bearded. So right now you're thinking Idris Elba, right? And I want you to think 10 times sexier with a splash of Denzel. And that, my friends, is what you have and you're listening to today. So that's it. So take that image in your head and hide your girlfriends.
Can confirm. I can see him and you cannot. So Google it now. I love it, man. So you this book is, first of all, it's amazing. Second of all, I thank Shauna again for not only referring the book to me, but saying, you got to listen to the audiobook version of this. And we were talking about this before we recorded, but it is different than any audiobook I've ever heard in all the best ways. Like, there's so much personality into it. So talk about like how that came to happen.
I'll tell you, man, my publisher and Hachette Audio basically said, have your way with the audiobook. And I even make a joke about it at the very beginning, at the top of the audiobook. So most audiobooks start with like, Hachette presents blah, 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 or Audible, and I cut in pretty much at the top of the audiobook. And I start talking to the engineer whose name is Jen. And I go, wait, Jen, wait, can I do whatever I want? She's like, yeah, I mean, sure, why not? And I'm like, all right, let's go. And I end up making her, who she's a white woman. She's actually a white lesbian woman. I love her to death. And I make her a kind of a part of the audiobook. I bring her into the moment with me because I wanted the audience to be very aware that I was aware, they were aware, we're all aware that I'm reading this thing, right? But in kind of actor form, I wanted to take you from kind of this loose experience of just hearing me tell the story. Then by the end, you feel like you're wrapped into it. Like it's no longer just an audiobook, but it's like you and I walking through my life together in a real and honest way. And some of the replies and responses I got from the audiobook, which I love, are I'll be running 3 miles, Tyler, and then you will make me run a 4th. Like, I don't want to stop listening to it, so I'll keep running. Or I'll have soccer moms who write me and they're like, Tyler, the amount of times I've sat in my driveway and listened to 3 more chapters. So I not only didn't have to go back in the house with my kids, but I also just wanted to listen. And the other thing that I hear, which I think is super sweet, but I think was unexpected, is how many people have said it's really hard to get into another audiobook after this one, you know? And I think that's oftentimes because most authors, if they're reading them themselves, they feel like I just have to read it through, you know? And I went in like, no. So we added sound effects and, you know, I got Jimmy Kimmel on it, my mom and my dad, and my best friend, James Earl Iglehart, who's a Tony winner. So, I mean, you've listened to it now. So, you know, we just go hard on the whole thing. So I appreciate you bringing that up. So I always think it's important on a podcast for the person who's running the podcast to give a true and honest, like no BS concept and idea to their listeners on how they really felt about the book. I know you were like, I really dig it, it's great, but I'm asking you, how did you, from top to bottom, going through, and it's okay, we're far enough away that my big blackness will not knock you out if you're like, it sucked. But how did you feel about the entirety of the experience, of the book in general?
I mean, I'll say this too, because I've told other guests this too. When I really like a book, I will absolutely tell you. I don't like blowing smoke just for the sake of like telling the guest, oh, the book was great. Because I'll be honest, like there are a lot of great academics who are brilliant, but their books are dry as dry can be.
Sure.
And then there are other people who are just gifted at telling a story, and that's the way I felt when I read your book, because you wove together so many different aspects. Like it's very obviously deeply personal. It's a story about your childhood through current day. It's a story about what it means to be a black man in America. And it's also a story about, you also plug in history, which the history nerd me was like, yeah, bring it. I like it. But like you also factor in like these very important historical facts that play into today. Because I think one of the things, and I'd love to talk to you about this, obviously, is some of the things that you bring up happened a long time ago, right? Like some of these laws and some of these acts that took place back in the 1900s. But so some people might be, well, why is he talking about this really old law from way back when? But it still has an impact on today, which is crazy. So I really love the way that you kind of wove all three of those things together throughout the book. And it was really entertaining and touching, and found myself laughing out loud at work, to the bemusement of my coworkers who are like, what is John doing? So
they're like, I'm reading about slavery. They're like, why are you laughing, bro? Like, that's not.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm like, long story. You got to read the book.
Right. Just trust me. One of the chapter that's called, I was doing perfectly fine, then damn it, here comes Jesus, is a chapter where I talk about lynching in the black church. But people remind me, they're like, you do realize that you started this chapter talking about vaginal steaming.
Yes.
And I'm like, you're right. We kind of went a long way in that chapter. We journeyed. We started at vaginal steaming and ended with lynching in the black church. You have to read it.
It makes sense once you're there. Yeah. But I feel like chronologically, I think the best place to start, obviously, is with your childhood, which you recount. And you had this really unique kind of upbringing because, in a way, you were sort of protected from what was going on in the rest of the country in regards to your skin color just by living in this really kind of eclectic place. So talk about like the impact that had and then how eye-opening it was when you went to visit other parts of the country.
Sure, man. I grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada. And anytime I tell people that, they're like, what's it like to grow up in Las Vegas around casinos all the time? And when you grow up there, you don't realize, like as a kid, man, you don't realize you're growing up in Las Vegas. Like I live in Nashville now. So it's similar to these kids that grew up here. And, you know, I used to mentor these high school students and I'd be like, what's it like growing up in Music City? And they're like, we don't know any other place. Or, bro, one of my favorite cities in the world is New York City, right? And I'll see like a 9-year-old kid walking, like riding a skateboard in like down, like in, you know, New York in the middle of the street. And I'm like, I want to know your story. Like, do you realize that you live in a place where people are like Broadway's down the street, bro, and you're just cruising on your skateboard and you just don't know that that's who you are and what you do. And so growing up in Las Vegas, man, like I talk about it in the book, it's such a diverse place for multiple reasons, right? Like, and there are technical, actual reasons why Las Vegas ends up being just this pot of just so many different people. And so I talk about when I was in elementary school, all of my friends were just so radically different as far as their skin tone and their background and their culture. And to me, this was normal. And look, I was very aware of the fact that I was black. I knew I was black and I was very aware. So it was never an issue. I never grew up thinking like color didn't matter. That wasn't it. It was the opposite. Instead, I'm looking at all these different people going, okay, this is how it is. But it wasn't until my mom took me out to Alabama and then to northern New York where I realized that this blackness that I had known was going to be a problem to some people. Las Vegas, in the midst of all the things that it is, they don't do the best job of pointing out how racisty the rest of the world is. You know, at least when I was a kid, that's how it is. And don't get me wrong, Las Vegas, Nevada, they have their own problems. Everywhere does. But as a child, I just didn't realize it was an issue. And I'm also aware that that's not the only place in the world that exists. But for me, it was this safe place that even now, my parents still live there. And that's home for me, man. And living in the South is just such a different experience. Or going to Texas, or I'm constantly reminded of my 6'2" blackness when I'm not in a place where I can look around and see other individuals that look like me.
Yeah, that had to be such a shock. Like I remember you recounting in the book, like the first time, like it really stuck out. Like, oh, for whatever reason, this is an issue. Yeah.
I talk about in the book about how when I visited upstate New York, my mom was going to visit a white family. And I'll tell you, man, this is funny because I haven't talked about this specific part a lot, but I went to go visit my mom's friend, and they had a kid. We ended up going fishing, which I have a kid's book coming out in September called A Door Made for Me, and I basically tell this story. And so him and I go out fishing, and we're walking back to go and tell all of his friends about all these fish that we caught. And so we go up to all these different doors, and people are like, yeah, you can't come in. Yeah, you can't come in. And at first I was like, you know, maybe they just don't want fish in their house. Like I didn't really get it. Then finally a woman opened up a door and just straight up said like, yo, that Negro boy can't come in. You can come in though. And I talk about in the book how that was like the first time, like that's something I realized this is something I can't change. Like if she would have said, your punk friend who, you know, spit in my yard can't come in, it's one thing. I'm like, that's a changeable thing for me. But to say that Negro boy can't come in, that's like, that's some stuff like a Disney villain says, you know, like it defines the core of who you are. And here I was, this is a part I was going to say, which I don't talk about a lot. Here I was thinking I was having this singular moment, right, John? Like where I was like this impactful moment with me that will forever change my life that only I can understand. And when I went to go write the book, I called my mom and I was like, hey mom, do you remember that time we went to upstate New York? And she was like, yeah, where all the racisty people were? And I was like, wait, what? Like, and she was like, yeah, man, it was bad. And I was like, so you were experiencing this too? She was like, yeah, we couldn't go to anybody's houses when we were there. We couldn't go to our friends' houses because they didn't want us. And I'm like, as a little kid, I'm having this experience, but you as a grown woman were having the same experience I was. And that was the first time, man, I realized that my skin tone was a problem for some people. And I remember longing to want to come home. And when I say come home, I meant specifically Las Vegas, a place where I felt like I was going to be safe. And even to this day, the idea of longing for home, I think, kind of ties to that experience.
Yeah, it brings me back to a conversation I had a couple of weeks ago. I was interviewing a guy from a pastor named Jonathan Martin, and he was talking about a sanctuary and your safe place, and when that becomes disrupted, and trying to find new safe places that you can go to. And it seems like, Las Vegas is clearly that's your safe place that you can retreat to. And the other two things I thought about that's interesting, I think that's shocking for a lot of people who just aren't at this point paying attention, I guess. But I think within the last few years, there's been a disruption in the system where a lot of the things that were already there have kind of boiled to the surface. And so like a lot of people think, well, racism, that's only something that happens in the South, and yet you're having this experience in about as far north as you can get. And people are like, oh, this only happens back in like, the 1960s or, prior to that. It's like, no, this happened in the 20th century. Like, and it's still happening now. Like,
we just passed the Emmett Till law just in March.
Yeah.
Of the anti-lynching law. Like, do you realize that, how old is your daughter, John?
She's 8.
She's 8, man. So when she's 18, when she's about to graduate from high school, you're going to be able to say to her, hey, honey, just so you know, we as the United States of America decided that lynching was bad 10 years ago when you were 8. In your lifetime, daughter, we decided that lynching was something that should be there should be a law against it, and man, when you look at the trickle down effect of what history has had on our current day and our present day, it's almost mind boggling, But also, I'll tell you this, bro, out of sight, out of mind. Like, if these things aren't affecting you on a personal, everyday level, I joke all the time, like, man, I can't even be, like, don't hate the player, hate the game. Like, for all my white friends, they're like, yeah, man, I didn't even know that was a thing. I'm like, yeah, you wouldn't know. And like, I ain't even mad at you on some level. Like, you're a white dude who, you ain't worried about an anti-lynching bill and when it passed. But me, I'm over here like, this affected the history of my people, of my mom and dad know stories of people that were lynched, and it's heavy. So I'm amening to these things that we place in history really do have an effect on our current day to day. If you look at redlining and you look at how we deal with healthcare. All of these things have a trickle-down effect from this history that really isn't that far away from us.
Yeah, it's great. I read in the article when it passed that it took 12 decades of failed attempts just to get this, what seems like a common sense law passed. Like, this clearly is a hate crime. Why in the world did it take us 12 decades to get this thing passed? It's unreal.
Bro, you do understand that there were still 3 people that voted against it. 3. There were 3. How are you so on the wrong side of history that when somebody says, like, can you imagine these 3 individuals' children when they're 20 and, they're learning in college that the bill had just been passed in 2022 and they're reading in their college history books the 3 people that said, no, we want to continue, like, anti-lynching isn't a problem. They have to read the name and realize that it was their father who said no. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, how far deep in the wrong side of history do you have to be be ignorant? And I don't mean ignorant in a negative way. I mean ignorant in the literal sense.
Right.
That you're ignoring what's happening around you, man. It's mind blowing to me, bro.
Yeah, and one of the things you talk about in the book too, just in terms of lynching in general, is just the fact that, again, when we think of lynching, we think, oh, that happened generations ago, and we think of, a bunch of rednecks in a pickup truck and a rope, but that's not what it is. It still happens, but it's evolved into something very different. And now we see it. I mean, we see it in the news all the time. It's just a different form. Sure. It just looks different now.
Yeah, man. You got to think about Ahmaud Arbery. He literally got chased down by 3 white men. Chased down and shot and killed and left in the middle of the road. I remember when the trial was happening, thinking to myself, if these men get off for lynching a man in the middle of, on tape in front of everyone, what kind of effect is that going to have, and what does that tell other individuals in the United States as to what they're allowed to do? And let me kind of cross over a little bit and talk about. I want to talk about just for a second the importance of the Black church in the midst of what was happening at that time period, and
yes, please,
and lynching and this, that, or the other, because I don't get a chance to talk about it all the time. During the time, and this hasn't changed, during the time when lynching was the thing, when it was happening on a continual, like, rotating basis, people are surprised to find out historically, especially people that aren't believers or have no sense of, like, kind of faith, that the Bible and the Black church was such a hope and a place for safety and reconciliation for Black people during the time of lynching. But what they didn't understand at the time, which I think is so significant, man, is pastors at that time, Black pastors, they had to play multiple roles, right? They couldn't just be the preacher on a Sunday morning, go home and hang out with their family and kids and, turn on a game in the middle of Sunday after a hard day. They were concerned about their lives as well. They had to be counselors, consolers. They had to be doctors, nurses. They had to take care of widows in a way that was a tangible way, bro. It wasn't just like, oh, we have somebody here who lost their husband. It was literally like, we are taking care of you because your husband is hanging from a tree down the way. And this was a pastoral role in the Black church at that point. And now let's look at 2022, where there are many, many, many churches, and I'm going to say the white church, and I'll say white church. And when I say white church, I don't mean like completely predominantly white, but I'm saying, like, if you can count the number of Black people in your church, you probably go to a white church, right? If you're like, but we have like 7, Tyler. I'll be like, dude, your church is white. It's cool. I'm mad about it. That's just what it is. You have things like George Floyd happening, and you have pastors and assistant pastors and all that coming together and going, guys, what are we supposed to do here? How do we address these issues that are happening in America? Maybe we get together and pull together like a social justice council, and maybe we meet on Wednesday night. Maybe every 4th Sunday we do like a 20-minute period talk where we talk about what's happening with Black people in America and this, that, or the other. What people don't understand is, for Black people, the Black church, Sunday morning is the social justice meeting. You follow me? Sunday morning is the time. There's no other time. There's not a Black church in America that's getting together going, yo, when are we going to talk about this George Floyd issue? Maybe Wednesday of next week? Because the church has always, for Black people, represented a place where they can come and lay down their lives. They can lay down their troubles. They can lay down their worries. And it was never political. It was about talking about how a God who is supposed to love us is going to walk us through this shitty life. I know I took us deep there for a minute, but I don't get a chance to really talk about that too much on everyday podcast, especially because it's a faith issue there, you know?
No, I'm glad you did. I actually have that in my list of questions I wanted to ask you about, is because you do bring up, there's this, I don't know if dichotomy is the right word, but there is this weird parallel situation going on between what's happening in the black churches at the time, and as you said, just this enormous amount of weight on the shoulders of black pastors. And yet down the road, there's the white churches who are preaching out of the same Bible, the same text, and defending things like slavery and essentially the dehumanization of an entire people group based on skin color. It's mind-boggling.
It is, and man, listen. You wonder how in the world are there still black Christians nowadays?
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like,
I wonder how there are any Christians in general these days. You know?
Right. But I mean, look. Let's keep it 100, shall we? If you are a white person who has the Bible, which is supposed to be the Word of God, telling you that you have a document that's allowing you to keep your power, that's basically like saying you, white person, should not only have this power, but here's scripture. We're going to use the scripture as to why you should keep this power. Like, why are you going to run from that religion? Like, I mean, and I do think that one of the biggest pieces, and this isn't new information, one of the biggest pieces to racism, I'm not going to say racism. I think one of the biggest problems that we have in the United States is people being afraid of losing their power. On almost every level, it's tied into people being afraid of losing their power. And this is history is not only showing this, but we're still seeing this today in our current, time. And I can list a million reasons, especially on this date with new information that has come out with the Supreme Court, which I won't necessarily touch on. But, there's a million reasons why we live in a place where people are trying their best to just keep their power.
Yeah, I mean, we see that when it comes to all sorts of political issues or things that become political when we use politics to retain power in some form or fashion. And it's, as you said, it's happening now. We don't even need to bring that issue up, but it's certainly a power play. And it's interesting. I talked to Andre Henry about a week ago, and we talked about just the history of how politics have been used as a tool to undermine any social justice progress that might have been made, but literally just to retain power for a political party.
100%, man. You white people, John, get it, pull it together, bro.
I know. Oh God, it's bad. The more history I learn, the more I'm just like, oh man, Scotland, I need to move back. So talk a little bit about because I think part of the big part of your story is obviously as you're kind of becoming a man and getting a little older and going through the most awkward years of life for anyone, going through junior high and high school and stuff like that. There are really some, as you call them, the sliding door moments, and just like the power of your mother, who sounds like an amazing woman, to kind of put you in the right place at the right time, to give you opportunities that maybe wouldn't have been there otherwise. And I identify with this wholeheartedly. I was also a theater kid, big into music, all that stuff. And so I found my people, and I think you even mentioned at one point, you're like, theater and the arts really kind of almost saved my life. And I feel that on another level. I went to a all-white high school that was in the middle of nowhere, very rural, experienced racism in front of me for the first time. And I was not raised that way. I remember I looked at my dad and he's just like, nope, and just never felt like I fit in there. And it was very much like football. And I love football. Don't get me wrong. But if you didn't play football, no one cared who you were, kind of thing. And I found my people through the arts, through music, through theater, and felt like I was connected to something for the first time. So talk about how that kind of threw you a lifeline, and then through that, some of the people you met who obviously still have an impact on your life today.
Yeah, man. Well, here's one thing that's great. How tall are you, John?
About 5'11".
Okay, you're 5'11". All right. I've always been a big dude, right? Like always. Okay. And so a little bit of history. My parents were from a little tiny town called Utah, Alabama, where they came out of, and growing up, my father, who ended up being in the military, like the way that you ended up succeeding as a black person back in those days, like if you were ever going to be successful, like, or even have like a way out, you either go into the military or you either play sports. Like there wasn't really like, you know, there weren't people at the time coming out being like, I'm going to be an astronaut. Like, so in my dad's mind, it was, you know, I have a boy and then my boy is strong and he's big and he's talented and he's athletic. And I talk about this a ton in my book. I played sports pretty much. I don't get me wrong. I enjoyed sports, but I also lived in Las Vegas. I was playing football in like 110 degrees weather, you know, as a kid. I loved sports, but the reason why I think I loved it the most is because that was what my dad not only wanted from me, but it's what he expected from me. And I was in it deep. To this day, you can go to my house in Las Vegas and there's a closet full of trophies from when I was a kid. And people always laugh when they're like, why are there all these trophies? I'm like, they're mine. I played sports up until I was like 13, you know? And man, growing up also where my middle school was super gang affiliated and then going to a high school, the first high school I went to that was super gang heavy. Man, I accidentally discovered theater. And you can't possibly understand, bro, what it's like for your Southern father who sees in you a richness to become a great, my sport was baseball. So he was like, you're going to be, to this day, my dad is like, you could have been a contender, you know? And for me to basically go home one day and go, yeah, I don't want to play sports anymore. I want to sing and dance. And he's like, oh, so you want to be Michael Jackson? I can get that. I'm like, no, more like Oklahoma. You know what I mean? He's like,
wait, what?
He's like, yeah, son, we need to have a conversation. But it wasn't even that, man. He wasn't even like, we need to have a conversation. My dad just kind of shut off and was like, all right, well, you know, and didn't come to any of my plays or anything. But I linked into the arts in a way, it set a fire in me like nothing had ever happened before. But how I talk about it in the book from a black perspective is I ended up going to a performing arts school my senior year. It's the first time a performing arts school existed in Las Vegas. And even though there were very few amount of black people there was another friend of mine who becomes my friend, his name Brian Jason Young, who's a dancer. And I watched this guy dance for this audition. And I'm looking at this dude, John, and I'm like, he's blowing my mind, bro. Like so talented. He's like a junior. And I'm watching this guy dance his ass off. And the director of it was for an audition. And the director was sitting next to me. I was the assistant director. And she's a white woman. And she's like, this guy is great. And I'm sitting there having like this existential moment of like, how did this black kid get here? Like, what the sun and moon and everything had to align to have this 15-year-old kid dancing in front of me like nothing I've ever seen before, which made me start to think and wonder, like, how many black kids are missing? How many black kids are we missing in the arts because they just didn't know that world existed for them, or that they had the ability to be able to be something great outside of the little world in which they existed, or what their parents expected of them. And their parents are expecting, look, you can't be mad at my dad that him growing up was like, this is what greatness looks like. And he was just raising me to be great. I didn't know there was this whole other world that I could get a scholarship for theater. I could get a Letterman's jacket in acting. Like, what? That's the whitest shit ever, John. Right? But, you know, I ended up getting it. But it's still, like, we just didn't know that I didn't know that sliding door moment, that singular thing that just changed me around, would end up having a lifetime impact on my life. And I still to this day think about, as we continue to cut the arts and funding of the arts, how my discovering art and comedy and how to deal with people, that's the reason why I'm sitting here with you today, man. And I think I just want that for not only for so many Black kids, but just for so many kids, period. Because I really do think the arts matter in a way that we will never be able to quantify.
I wholeheartedly agree. When those sorts of things started to happen, and like, don't get me wrong, I love sports, but when sports exist after arts programs get cut, that's where I'm like, what are we doing? Like, a game won out over something that could provide a career or provide back to the community in a way that, you know, this child maybe couldn't otherwise. Like, you talked about the fact that math is not your thing. I am terrible at math. If that was my only option, I would be worthless in society.
Right.
You know?
Right. But listen, man, let me tell you this. And I'm about to open up a can of controversial, okay? But I'm going to I'm going to talk about how race in America is it's in things we don't even think about. Because I'm going to bring this thing up, and there are going to be people that are going to go, I never thought about that before, but this is a real thing. Okay, I'm telling you, I'm going to open up a can right now. But first, let me start by saying I am a fan of football. I love the NFL. I watch college football. In my book, I say Roll Tide 98,000 times. I know people probably just hung up after they heard me say that, but I'm a fan of football. But let's talk race and football for a second. We have now, because of science, have decided and have figured out that football, no matter how we try to in technology, try to advance it to protect us, is literally killing people. Okay, football is literally killing people. Not like figuratively, but literally. I remember back in the days, I used to joke with my friends about going like, why did people go watch gladiators? Like, who were you that you would go watch people fight to the death? And now I look at us as we watch the NFL, which I already said I watch. I'm guilty of this, but we are also seeing that people are dying from CTE. You know who decided they don't want their kids to play football anymore? White people. White women and men of a certain economic status. Go Google this stuff. Like, their whole entire football programs in like white rural places have fallen because their parents are going, no, my kids aren't doing that, because they also don't need to do that. Right. But instead, you know who still feels the pressure to succeed and will fight to the death to try to get into college? Are young men of color who are going, this is my only way out. And so now you have a class of people that are now watching men of color play a game with at a higher percentage that they are watching and they are pouring into, that they have decided they're not going to let their own children play. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? This is everyday racism in America that we don't pay attention to. But as a black person, I look at that and I go, this is directly in front of my face. But these are a lot of things that people don't have to think about. You know, like I said, I know people are like, everybody feels a certain way about the NFL and football. And so I know I'm kind of opening a can with that, but I'm also not like, I'm just giving statistics here. I'm not, trying to stand, make a big point so much as I'm just saying this is the world that we live in, Yeah,
and you make this great point in the book where you talk about just professional sports in general is like we've been sold this lie that, as you said, your only two options to get out of the situation you're in, to succeed in life, to make millions of dollars. I mean, look at won't say who, but the Cleveland Browns may have signed a quarterback who has a little controversy behind him. But aside from that,
right,
he got signed to the biggest deal in league history, hundreds of millions of dollars to play a game. And you point out in the book, like, yeah, if you see your only options to succeed in life as sports or like music, like I remember I went to college to be a teacher, and we had to do observations, and we had to go to different grade levels. And I was at a middle school on the outskirts of Columbus, and it was predominantly black students at this school.
Sure.
And I remember talking to the kids, and the kids reflected that notion that their only option was to make it in sports or to become a rapper. And
yeah, man.
And one of the kids did make it as a rapper, but I was like, guys, his uncle was also Snoop Dogg, so that probably helped, you know? So, like, I wouldn't bank on that happening, you know? Like,
right.
We got to keep you in school, and, like, you can do it with your brain, you know? And, like, but, like, dispelling that notion, and then also, like you said, if we put as much time and effort into developing these young minds as we do developing them as athletes, who do we miss out on? And you point that out in the book too, in terms of, I think you pointed out some musicians and stuff, like they could have been mathematicians. We'll never know.
Right. I talk about, why doesn't Shaq play volleyball?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And if he did, if Shaq played volleyball, he would be the best volleyball player of all time. Granted, he's also like one of the best basketball players of all time. But if Shaq was playing volleyball, like it would be a wrap. Yeah. You know what I mean? But how did he not end up there? And there's systematic reasons as to why we end up being where we are, man. And look, I drive a pretty fancy car here in Nashville, and I pull up to a gas station and get out of the car, and the first thing, you know, oftentimes white people say to me is, and this is funny because I haven't talked about this a ton, about the different reactions that I get from things. White people will say to me is like, "Hey man, that's a great car. Are you a ball player? Like that's are you a Titan? Do you play in the Titans?" And what I will accept that thing in exchange for every time that I've heard when I've got out of my car and some young black kid will walk up to me and he'll be like, "Yo, man, you dripping right now, bro. You look, man." It's like, what do you do? What do you do? I need to know. How do I? And I'm like, man, I'm an author. What?
Yes.
What?
I love that.
You know, and I'm like, I'm an actor. Shut up. You know, and just being able to say to young black men, there is success out in the world like you just can't dream of, and we just typically aren't raised that way, man. And that's my hope. That's one of the reasons why I wrote this book. I gave the dedication saying like, we are not monolithic. And I love when I have black people reach out to me and say, "Thank you for writing this book," because giving a continual permission and telling out to the world that there isn't just one way to be black. And if there's anything you pull out of this book, is that I'm pretty clear that that's the case there. There's not one way.
Yeah, and one of the other things I wanted to talk to you about too is you also mentioned that part of the problem too is just like our education system in terms of the amount of funding that goes into all, you know, predominantly white schools versus schools that have a prevalence of minority groups. And also, like, and I love this. You brought this up because I remember reading something similar in Dr. Drew Hart's book, The Troubles I've Seen. Love that guy. Love his work. But he talks about the same thing where he's like, how many black authors do you remember reading in high school or in your educational journey? And I just stopped and think about it. And I was like, you know, most of the black authors I read because I found out about them after the fact. Like, no one ever told me about James Baldwin. I was pissed. I was like, James Baldwin's one of the most beautiful writers I've ever read in my life, and no one told me about him.
Right.
Like, how?
No one ever told me about it. Right. Like, you're like, how am I discovering about this dude now?
Yeah. The Fire Next Time. One of my favorite books of all time. That thing is poetry. And didn't know about it until I stumbled across a documentary like 3 years ago. That's insane. Yeah.
Right. And I think most people growing up, they're like, they get the general. I talk about this in my book. You get the generals, you get the Langston Hughes. Like most people would probably know Langston as far as a writer goes, but that's
Maya Angelou, you know.
Maya Angelou, that, you know, if you're lucky, you know what I'm saying? But we could go on that path for years and years and for forever, man. But I appreciate you bringing it up.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think when you don't have models of anything other than, you know, like athletes and musicians, when they do exist, but you're only presenting like two avenues, it's like what do we expect, you know?
Right.
It's like,
right.
we've got to present more role models that are more as diverse as the community from which they come, you know?
True that, man.
Yeah. So talk about, I love this quote, by the way. I'd love for you to expand on it, where you say, maybe eagles marvel at dolphins and maybe dolphins marvel at eagles.
Oh yeah, man. That ties into the story I was telling about my friend Brian Jason Young, who was this dancer at this performing arts school. And I looked at him like, what in the world is going on? And I remember sitting there watching him, wondering how he got there. But the reason why, the backup to that story is, and I definitely tell it better in the book, is I joke about how this was one of the most defining moments in my life in high school, where it could have made or broke me here, right? Where I was supposed to audition for this musical for Fame, but I was working on a different show, Ain't Misbehaving, so I couldn't audition for it. And the director was like, you would have gotten cast at Leroy, Tyler. Like, if you would have auditioned for this play, you would have been playing the main role. But we didn't know that also auditioning was going to be this Brian Jason Young character. And if him and I would have both auditioned at the same time, it would have been mayhem. Like, I wouldn't have even auditioned. The only reason there was one person auditioning is because everybody watched this guy rehearse and they were like, I'm out.
Yeah.
Like, it would have been it. But what happened at the Academy that year, I was already doing another show, Ain't Misbehaving. And then we later did this like Broadway revival show where I did a song from Ain't Misbehaving called Your Feet's Too Big. And it was the singing comedic piece that everybody loved. They were like, Tyler, you are a beast in the entertainment industry and you were only a senior in high school. Brian Jason Young looked at me and went, I can't sing like that. Like, I can't do what that black kid just did. Like, that's not my jam. I can dance circles around him, but to get up and break down a song, learn how to communicate it in a comedic way and this, that, or the other. Even at that young age, man, I realized like, you know, the rest of my life is going to be a world of comparison. And I have to figure out kind of how to make that comparison work in my advantage, and just understand that there are some people that are going to be great at things, and we need to stand in awe of their blessing, right? And look at the better things that they are putting out in the world that may not be my jam, but to know that they are also looking at me in the same way. And I want to use this moment to say to people that are listening, you are not alone when you're scrolling through social media or on Instagram. You're scrolling through things and you're looking at people and going, oh my gosh, look at what they have. And I'll get really specific. I know women do this often, and I know because my best friend's a girl. It's hard to scroll through and go, you know, as a single woman, go, oh, I see this woman, my friend who now has a family and 3 kids and all of these things. And you're looking at that and you're going, this is ideal and maybe something that I desire, while she's also scrolling through your pictures and going, that single 40-year-old woman is in New York by herself at her Broadway show. That is something I could never do with my 3 busted ass kids. Right? You know what I'm saying? Like, or in the same way, I'm an actor, man. Like I'm scrolling through social media all the time, looking at people. No joke. I'm about to go work on this NBC show next week, and I don't post about it because I have good friends that I know also read for it as well, and I don't want them to go, I read for this thing and I didn't book it. But even though I'm about to go work on this show next week, I can go on social media today and scroll through and see a friend of mine that booked something else and find myself going, oh man, look what they have. When in reality, God, how much better would life be if we were all able to just marvel at each other in the ways that God marvels at us, and just say, yo, this thing that this individual is doing or has accomplished, or this goal or skill that they have, is the perfect thing for them. And that's amazing. And that's something that I learned at a really young age in my situation with Brian Jason Young, going, I may never dance like that, but he's never going to be able to sing like that, like this. And that's okay, because that is how we make the world beautiful.
Yeah, because both of you bring something unique to the table, and we're all better for it at having both of you in the world.
Yeah.
You know, there's enough room at the table. That's what we always say, you know?
There's enough room at the table.
Yeah. I love where you say, because I know a term that was used a lot when I was growing up when it came to social justice and rights was this term tolerance. And I never felt fully comfortable with tolerance, because tolerance always said to me, well, we're tolerating you, meaning like we don't like you, we don't agree with you, but we'll put up with you and not raise a stink about it. Like that didn't feel like social justice to me. And you talk about it being that like really is the bare minimum. So talk about, and you bring this up a lot throughout the book, and I freaking love it, where you talk about the power of proximity and how it breeds empathy and how we can go further than just tolerance.
Yeah, I think you're completely right, man. The idea of tolerance is that we can tolerate each other. We go like, you know, we're in the same room, and because we're all in the same room, we're going to have to deal with each other. Sure. But I don't think that's even a biblical concept. You know what I mean? Like we're all in this world so that we can just tolerate each other.
Well, that's not what Jesus said. He didn't say tolerate your neighbor, you know? It's like, what are the greatest commandments? Tolerate your neighbor and tolerate. No.
Right. Tolerate thy God and tolerate thy neighbor.
Right.
You know what? I need to make t-shirts that say that.
I love it. I'd buy one.
That's fantastic. But for real, man, imagine if we just walk the earth with that being our number one, the bar that we were trying to achieve. And when I talk about in my book, which I mean to the core of who I am, man, gosh, if we allow ourselves to really spend quality time with people that do not look like us or that may look like us and live different stories, to really like take some time and spend moments to learn people's stories and history, that tolerating becomes so much more. It becomes a respect. It becomes an honoring. It can even become like a little bit of envy in a good way of wanting to be able to go like, I may not have lived your life. I may not know your story, but knowing your story and hearing your life from your perspective is making me richer. It's making me better. So I'm not just tolerating you as an individual being different, but now I'm beginning to fall in love with you in a way that I could have never expected if I wouldn't have opened this door to allow you in to who I am. And that's a tangible thing, man, that I think that we ignore. There are people who have sat at desks in their workplace for years now with 3 different people that look different from them, you know, all around them, and have never stopped to go, hey, tell me about your kid in this picture. And why are they wearing a yarmulke? Or let's talk about who you are. And just those moments, man, of trying to find out about the people around us on a level that goes beyond skin deep. That's the kind of stuff that alters who we are as people, man. You never know the richness. You never know the richness that is right around the corner from you unless you stop and look and ask and take it in and take away some of these internal fears that we have and just go, you know what, I'm going to bypass this fear and I'm going to take a step forward to see if there is an ability to love someone better here and go beyond this just toleration in this dancery. You know what I mean? Like we're just going to deal with it as we go.
I feel that on such a deep level. I remember I got into this, like, I try not to, but I got in this Facebook debate, we'll say, with a guy who I wasn't even like really good friends with, but we had become Facebook friends over the years. We went to high school, the same high school. And like I said, very rural, very white Christian bubble, you know?
Sure.
And I engaged with him because he was posting some things that were just blatantly wrong about Islam. And
sure.
I've studied a little bit, and I don't profess to be an expert, but what he was saying was just factually inaccurate.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, man, that's just not true. That's not true. That none of that is true, and we got into this big debate, and, of course, Christianity got brought into it and stuff. And
For sure.
I said, look, man, you live in this really tiny town. I live in this city that actually has diversity that I encounter on a daily basis. And you have relationships with people who are different than you and think different than you. And I think back to an experience I had where a coworker, I needed to go to a temple for a paper I was writing. So I went to this Hindu temple and had an hour-long conversation with the temple priest. It was one of the most spiritually just beautiful awakening moments I've ever had in my life.
Right.
They could not have been more welcoming, welcome me to this giant feast. No attempts to convert me or any of these other things, but I saw the heart of these people. And I told them, I'm like, look, man, I can't unknow that now. I can't unsee that because I know them on a level now that I didn't before. And so I can't just blatantly parrot these things that you're saying and believe those things to be true because I know the truth now,
Wow.
And like, I can't go there with you. I just can't, and I think that's so true though,
Yeah, man. And listen, I talk about this in the book as well. Like, I'm going to go here for a second, which I don't think is unusual on your podcast, but when I hear, especially my Christian friends, granted, my circle's gotten a lot smaller as far as putting people around me that trust and kind of feed into my peace, but I also have a broad social media world where when I hear my Christian brothers and sisters talk about gay people and what they think gay people are and who they are, my number one thought is you don't know any gay people.
Right.
Like you don't know any gay people. I joke about how I'll have some guy go, I don't want that gay guy around me because I don't want him to touch my booty. I'm like, you are not hot enough for any of my gay friends.
Right.
Like none of my gay friends would mess with you, bro. Like never. There's not a world that exists. Like no gay friend I have would ever want you ever, period, bro. Just no. It's
Exactly.
fact. I can tell you no gay people.
Right.
But I think, and I, like what I talk about in my book, like I grew up around a kid from a small age to us becoming adults. He came out to me eventually, and I've known this kid since I was like 7. And I'm hard pressed to have anybody stand in front of me and try to tell me what they think about gay people. Because gay people are not, it's not theoretic for me. It's not an idea for me. Like, they're my friends. They're my family. And it's always so interesting, man. I'll go so far as to say probably 93% of the time, you can take a parent, especially like in a right-wing kind of fundamentalist kind of world who feels a certain way about gay people or trans kids or whatever. It's amazing how quickly their personality and their ideas change if suddenly their kid comes out.
Yeah.
Right? Now, granted, I'm saying this like 90-ish% of the time because you have the other grouping that are like, I'm never going to deal with it. But you can be one of the most hard-pressed, fundamental, like Christian, like whatever, feeling a certain way about gay people. And then your kid who's like 18 decides to go, this is who I am. And suddenly you are left dealing with like, how do I deal with this love of this person that I have, and now understanding that this is their life choice, and you're almost forced into a situation where that proximity gives you no other option than to love the person in front of you. And it ends up being a beautiful, beautiful thing to watch. And is also a super incredible study on once you are forced to be in proximity with that thing that you may fear or may not know, how you can't help but to shift in your ability to love that person.
That's so funny. I just interviewed a woman who would tell you she was came up like a fundamentalist and very staunch, and that very thing happened where her daughter came out, and it ruptured everything that she thought she believed. And like
Wow.
you say in the book too, about your gay friend, and she said the same thing about her daughter, and I said the same thing to my best friend in one of my best friends in high school. Came out to me our senior year. We were at a drive-in movie theater, and I could tell she was terrified, and we always knew, Right. And we were like, we knew. You may not have known. We knew.
Right.
But we all kind of had the same reaction, where our gut reaction was like, I love you anyway. Like, my first reaction wasn't, hang on, what does my Christian upbringing say about this? My first gut reaction was like, I know you, and I've known you since you were a kid, and nothing in this world will ever change the fact that I love you, period.
That's beautiful, man. And what you just said, I think there are so many young people and adults too, man. Adults that feel like they will probably never come out because they are concerned that they won't hear those words. And though you say them lightly and easy, and that's just what your heart is, man, there are so many individuals in the world right now that are still fighting because they are afraid that they won't hear those words, man. And it was easy for you, and it's easy for someone like me to go, I just need you to trust my heart on this. But there are people in the world who are waiting to hear those words, man. And I just want to encourage anybody who's listening to this right now that there are so many people in this world that can be a safe place for you. And I am one of them. John is one of them. And even though he's a white man and we fear white people, we are a soft place to land.
Absolutely. One of the things I want to talk about, one of the threads throughout your book is, it kind of goes back to that cliche, when one door closes, another door opens kind of thing, where you've had some things that have happened to you in your life that were obviously incredibly disappointing. And I think a lot of people listening to this podcast can identify with the fact that the church has failed us a lot. And you've had some instances in your past where you talk about when you first became a youth pastor, and just kind of the way in which they handled it, and then later on, again getting involved with the church, and then having things kind of fall apart on you, and so. But all of those things kind of led to where you are today. So talk about like how those things kind of falling apart led to essentially what would become the Tyler Merritt Project.
Yeah. My friend Glennon Doyle, she talks about how when you're at the very bottom of something, like you know that the richness and the rebirth is soon to come, right? When you're at the bottom, in the moment when you're in it, it's really hard to look at, but there are very few times in our life where we look back and we're at the bottom of something that we didn't realize that the next thing that was to happen is to rise from it. And I think now that I'm older, I'm able to have a little bit of patience and grace in those moments, right? But when you're going through them, especially in your 30s, you're thinking like it's over. You know what I mean? And my life is over. And I don't want to give too much away, but like many people that are listening to this podcast, I'm sure, like I worked in a church. I had what the church would call a moral failing and a moral failure. And the church I was working at the time kind of wasn't equipped on how to deal with it. And there were a lot of factors that went into it, which I talk about in my book. It was much deeper than what I just applied it to. But I remember coming out of that situation and thinking like, well, that's a wrap on me being able to have any sort of impact on the world now. Because I've had church leaders who've looked me in the face now and pretty much said, you're worthless. And thank God I had a mom who was like, boy, you better stop it. Tyler, stop it. You are not what they say you are. You are who he says you are. You are who I, as your mom, say you are. And that was just one incident early on in my 30s that I had to take a moment and say, I am more than what the church says I am or what I can be. And as I began to build myself up, I still hadn't dealt with some of the core issues that were happening in the midst of all that. And later in life, I for lack of a better word, failed again. And at this point, pretty much, I jumped off social media for 2 years, like left the world and was like in the valley for 2 years again at a place going like, oh God, how did I get here again? And again, I had to have my mom say to me, and some of the young people in my life, some kids who can't see the bad in me. They only see the good, right? Look at me and say, like, you are so much more than your failures. And having some of my high school students that I mentored at the time, some of these black kids on the football team looking at me being like, yo, it's your realness and your brokenness that allows us to hear your voice. It's your realness. Because we're not trying to deal with people that walk in the door like we've never been through anything. Even talking about that makes me a little bit emotional, thinking about how sometimes in our most broken places, those are the places that we are getting built up to be the strongest, you know? Yeah. And we don't have the ability to see that in the moment. But looking back now, if you would have told me in those deep, dark moments, I would end up writing a book about those deep, dark moments. And I'll tell you what's funny for people that are listening to this book right now. They're like, so wait, listening to this podcast right now, they're going, wait. You talk about vaginal steaming, you talk about lynching, you talk about the church, you talk about your parents. What is this book? Like, what is happening here? And there's really no way to explain it unless you're in it, because I purposely kind of will you in. I like reel you in on learning history, laughing a lot, but also getting to talk to you about how like kind of God affected me in a pretty kind of special way in my bro.
Yeah. I even have a hard time like, because I never heard the term brokenness or broken used so many times until I experienced like kind of what more charismatic evangelical Christianity. And I'm like, man, you know, like it's not even brokenness. It's just we're going through what it is to go through the human experience.
100%.
Like, we're just being real human, you know, in these moments. And like everybody, I mean, if I'm broken, everybody's broken in some form or fashion. Like we're all just
100%.
what it is to be alive, you know? And like, yeah.
And I don't hide too much away from the word broken, because I feel like everything that's broken can be rebuilt, you know?
Yeah.
Everything that's broken can continue to be constructed. And I think if you're looking at broken, like that's broken, this is a broken toy, you need to throw it out. That's one thing, right? It's another thing if you're going, there was a period of time where I was walking tall, but now I've been broken down from that. You know, that's a different way to kind of look at it. But I feel you. And I think that's just our human experience.
Yeah.
You know? And sadly, we fight against that human experience too. We end up covering that in shame, right? And which I talk about a ton in my book. Like we find ourselves, one of the undertones, another like theme of my book is talking about how if every person who dealt with shame we just kind of threw away, how many people would we lose in this journey? Like, and I talk about in the very last chapter of my book, which is one of my favorite chapters, where I say to the reader, like, you've now walked with me through so many things. But here I am, still. Here you are, still. And I hope that you can see that no matter what we've walked through together, you still have a voice. You can still use it. And how many people have we lost that have gone, I no longer have a purpose here because of the shame I'm walking with, you know?
Right. makes me think of you'd really like, or one of my favorite theologians, authors, whatever you want to call her, speakers. Dr. Jacqueline Bussey wrote a book called Love Without Limits. And I got to hear her speak. Oh, it's so good, man. I got to hear her speak about it, though. And one of the things, I don't even know if it's in the book necessarily. I think it's in one of her 2 books. She has another one called Outlaw Christian. But point is, she talks about scars and how scars are points of shame historically. Like, we try to hide our scars. And she's like, no, you got to show your scars and wear them as a badge. You know, like scars are something that show that we're alive. We survived.
We've seen some shit.
And we lived through it to talk about it, you know? That's a sign of strength, not a weakness, you know?
I love that, man. I love it.
There was another sermon I heard too a long time ago where one of my friends, Mel, she's a pastor, and she did this sermon that I thought was brilliant. She had this picture of a bull, this very, very ancient China bull, and it had cracks in it. And then she talked about this ancient practice that society had when they would get a crack in something, they would repair it, you know? But instead of repairing it in the way that we might, where you try to hide the cracks, they would use like this gold filler. And so the cracks stood out, but it was it'd become this beautiful thing where the cracks were now seams of gold. And that was intentional. And I thought, that is completely contrary to the way we operate.
Absolutely the opposite of the way that we walk through, especially in Christian culture.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we need to get rid of the shame wagon. We need to jump off of at this point.
I think it was Bakari Sellers. Him and I got into this really weird, random talk about spirituality on his podcast, and which was unexpected, but he asked me, he was like, what kind of pastor do you like? And I was like, the what? Like, what direction is this going? And I said to him, I was like, I'll be honest with you, man. I'm like, man, I want my pastor to be like real enough that he just might get fired.
Yes.
Like, I need my pastor to be like, I need him to not be so far that he's going to ruin the church, but I need him like right there on the line.
Yeah.
Like that when he's preaching, you know, he's preaching from from a real and honest place. Like that's the pastor that I need.
Yeah. Like just once when something truly fucked up happens, I want a pastor to get up there just once and say, guys, that was immensely fucked up. Just once. Because we're all thinking it. And God's probably thinking it too, you know? Like, just be real.
Right. And man, I've worked in kids ministry before. So, you know, in kids ministry, when you have the pastor's kids come in and you have the pastor's kids come in and they're talking shit about their parents, right? And you're like, oh, so your dad is a prick. You're like, yeah, he is. He's horrible. And you're like, okay, I thought he was. Like, we all think he's a prick, but thank you for justifying that here in this Sunday school class. You know what I mean? Like, he's much cooler in real life than he is on stage. Like, he's actually an asshole, right? Is he? Cool. All right, great.
100%. Yeah. That's so funny. Well, one of the things, the thing I want to end on, because I know we're definitely getting over time here, was kind of the journey that really took you to a place where you came out of this, as you put it, you know, this period of time where you're off the grid completely, and your confidence is shaken, and you're like, what is my purpose? And kind of, you know, wandering through the desert, if you want to call it that. And then you put out this video that to this day chokes me up, called Before You Call the Cops. And so tell me about like what inspired the video. And you do mention that every piece of that was intentional, and you can tell. And it's absolutely beautiful, and it went obviously super viral. Yeah. And so talk about first, like what went into it, and then how did that change your life? Because obviously it had to have in many ways. Yeah.
So what birthed it is in chapter 1, I talk about the chapter 1 of our book is called If She Only Knew, where I encounter this white woman in a truck as I'm about to cross the street. And I walk all the time here in Nashville, and I usually walk with a hood on, with a bandana on to keep the sweat out of my eyes, and my glasses on, and my headphones on. And I'm very aware of what I look like as a 6'2" black person walking down the street looking the way that I do. And I went to go cross the street like I always do, and I knew I was going to have to pass this white woman in her truck. I was going to have to pass her driver's side window, and that she was going to see me, and I didn't want to frighten her. So before I get close to her, I took down my hoodie, my glasses, my everything, and put on a big smile, and I'm just trying to cross the street, and she turns and looks at me slowly. It's not like I startle her. She turns and looks and then sees me and freaks out and like goes and locks her door all dramatically. And I stop in front of her and I start laughing at her. And I'm not laughing at her because I'm laughing directly at her. I'm laughing because I was thinking, if you only knew all the things that I had to do to keep what just happened from not happening. Like if you just knew, like everything that I did to keep you from not freaking out, and you still did. And as I finished my walk and as I walked back home and tried to figure out exactly what was going on with the rest of my life, I got home and decided that I wanted to try to express to this woman, like if you knew who I was, if you had an actual concept or an idea of who I was, you might actually love me. Not only love me, but like really get to know me. You might want to get to know me. Not only love me, you would think that I was the best thing that ever happened to you in your life. And so I came home and I decided to make this video just kind of talking about who I am and what I'm about. And it was important for it to call it before you call the cops, or it starts off by saying, before you call the cops, I want you to know. It was important to do that because I don't think people understand that calling cops on black people, it's a matter of life or death. And people are starting to figure that out now, right? Like when, you know, if that old white lady decides she wanted to call the cops on me, suddenly cops show up not understanding what I'm about, what's going on. She has put her fear of her own personal fear into this cop now who's now going to, like, it can be a life or death issue, which we have seen now time and time again on video. And I just wanted to say to this woman, like, this is who I am. And I want to be really clear here. It wasn't because I was trying to humanize myself to her. That wasn't it. It wasn't because I was going, you need to understand that I'm a human. No, that wasn't it at all. It was instead me just going like, look, if you just knew me, if you knew that I was walking to this bench right now because I was trying to go and see my mother and I love her more than anything in the world, if you knew my dad was military, if you knew that I hate spiders and they're from Satan, if you knew that bananas are disgusting, if you knew that I know every single word to the NWA's Straight Outta Compton, every word, because I grew up in the hood, but I also know every word to Oklahoma, maybe you would reevaluate what you want to do with your next actions. And man, I put this thing on video, and I'll be honest with you, John, like, I created this piece of content and I watched it, and it was this is honestly what happened, bro. I watched this and it's three, a little bit over 3 minutes. And I went, I don't know how good of an idea this is. Nobody's going to want to watch. Nobody's going to want to watch me talk about myself for 3 minutes. This just doesn't make any sense. And then it was like 1:30 in the morning. And so I sent a video over to my friend Lisa, who lives in California. And I was like, hey, I just made this video. What do you think? And she texted me back and she said, this feels holy. And I went, okay, well, I guess I'm going to post it then. That's cool. And in the video, I wasn't wearing a shirt because I was trying to like be very like just open and naked before the world kind of, and my mom to this day is like, boy, why did you not wear a shirt in this video? And I was like, look, if I knew 100 million people were going to see it, I would have put a shirt on. Like I would have left that piece off of this whole thing. And I look back now and that video changed my life. And it was just me telling the world who I am as a black man. And it was shocking to see how many people just needed to to have a little bit of proximity in their life, you know? And I talk about it in the book about how it all wasn't like rainbows and flowers with that video being out. But I do think that there's a lesson to be learned here, that sometimes when there's something that's in your heart, take forward movement in bringing that thing to completion, because you never know what kind of impact it's going to have on the world.
Oh man. And little did you know, I mean, it's, you talk about this too in the book, where it goes viral, not just once, but it goes viral a second time, because Jimmy Kimmel, talk show host, going through a tough time with his child, and also aware of everything that had been going on in the world, sees it and asks permission. Hey, can I show this on his talk show? And then it blows up again. And so, like, in what ways did that, you know, obviously as an activist, maybe, you know, reluctantly so, as you mentioned before, but it clearly is something that opened up a lot of doors for you to be able to do a lot of amazing work. So how did it change you in a differently, maybe the second time around?
I'll tell you, the Jimmy piece was good. And don't get me wrong, like that definitely expounded. But by the time Jimmy used it, it had been like everybody had seen it. You know, I feel like he was kind of on the backside of it. He even joked about it. He was like, this video's old, but here it is. But I think the biggest impact of that is that it was around the time of George Floyd, and I had made the video 2 years prior, right? So it had gone viral 2 years before George Floyd, and I was off social media when it started to go viral this second time. I was completely gone because I was still in my like, woe is me, I'm never going to be able to do anything good with my life. And little did I know that like the Tyler Merritt Project, Before You Call the Cops, was trending on Instagram while I was like in my woe is me. Right?
He's like, you need to get back on now.
That's my friend Joy Reid. That's what she said. She was like, you need, because I sent Joy this other video that I made called The Playlist, which has now been called, I think, Walking While Black, if you look at it in social media. I sent it to my friend Joy, and in this video I didn't make for the world. I just made it for me because I had been in the desert for 2 years and I was walking every day, and I thought this video was kind of funny of like what I was listening to in my headphones. And I sent it to Joy, and Joy was like, you need to post this shit now. Pull it together. And then Jimmy's wife, Molly, too, hit me up and was like, you need to like pull your shit together, bro. Like, you are a voice that needs to be heard in the world right now. So whatever you're going through that makes you think that your life is so bad, like, we need you now, right? And it's that lesson that I try to pull on to a lot of people nowadays, where I'm like, yo, kick your shame to the curb. Like, kick your shame to the curb and get in this fight with me, with us, because there's things going on in the world that only you, and I need your listeners to hear this, man. There are things in the world that only you, specifically you, can have an impact on. Your unique, beautiful, wonderful self that I can't do, that John can't do, that only you can do. And we need you to do that. And in my case, sure, it just so happens that everything fell in line, and the world ended up seeing this piece that I had put together. But look, that may not be your story. I don't know what your story is, but you need to know that we need you now more than ever. So kick your shame to the curb and get back in the fight.
Bro, I think that's where we got to end it. Can't end it better than that. That's beautiful, man. Thank you so much. And before I let you go, though, what are you working on now? Where can people go to stay up on top of, now that you're back on social media?
Yeah. The Tyler Merritt Project has built a pretty great community online, so you can find me anywhere on Facebook under the Tyler Merritt Project, Instagram, the Tyler Merritt Project, Twitter at TTM Project. And I have a kid's book coming out, like I mentioned, in September. I think it's September 13th, called A Door Made for Me, which I'm so excited about. Yeah, and you stay on top of the stuff that I do there. And you can always go to the TylerMerrittProject.com, and then I'll kind of give you the entirety of my life and what's happening.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, man. This was an absolute pleasure and absolute joy for me. This is so much fun.
Yeah, man. Let me just say to you really quick too before we go, man. And I know how edits work, so you might cut this off. So I'm going to say don't. But listen, man. Speaking of things that only you can do. What, you're 100 plus 160 something episodes deep in this, man. 6 years ago, you started talking about deconstruction, like 6 years in a podcast, something, man, that you made deconstruction way cooler way back then before anybody else did. And, man, I just want to encourage you to keep doing what you're doing, because you're impacting people in ways that you just don't know. You're impacting people in ways that you will never get to experience or understand. I did not know that this is what was happening in your world. While I can be sitting over here going, man, I hope my book has impact. You're over here going, I want this guy on my podcast. You need to know that in moments where you may feel like this is just another thing that I'm just doing, this is the 168th episode, that there are individuals who listen to this today and whose lives you've changed because you provided for them a community for them to be able to grow and learn. So take that, John, and know that this is, even when it doesn't feel like it, man, you're having an impact on the world that that a lot of people can't do. And so thank you for doing this, man. It means something. It makes a difference.
That might be the nicest compliment I've ever gotten. So thank you. I appreciate that. For sure. Hey, sliding doors.
Sliding doors, bro.
Yeah. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate that. It's, again, just an absolute pleasure to have you on, and keep doing what you're doing. It makes a difference. And if in any small way my podcast can help get your message out, then more than happy to do it.
I appreciate it, man. I know you think this is reparations, but it's not. All right, John? This is not reparations. Because you have a little podcast now helping out Black people.
Nah, just trying to get the good word out, man. So, yeah.
I appreciate you, bro.
Yeah. For us, it's always been about... there's plenty. I always tell people, I'm like, they always ask, well, why do you have certain guests on? I'm like, man, they have a megaphone. We're trying to give the folks who like have really interesting things to say who don't have a megaphone at least a platform in our own weird way. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's just it's all about trying to get as much good content out as possible and show people that there are options in a world where they think there aren't. So
yes, sir. I love that, man.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, man. Yeah, we got to do this again sometime. So
yeah, we do. For sure.
All right. Thanks, Tyler.
Thanks.
John was young and driven with a heart of gold. Finished seminary, married, found a church he could go home. Made a living giving dying folks a shoulder and a hand, until he told his leaders that he had some feelings for another man. And they said, John, you must go and take your broken heart and walk it to the door. We know you're hurting and you've been giving, but now you're damaged goods and you gotta give some more. John, we love you, but we can't love you. You must go. Jen could sing a song and channel the divine. Spent a decade sharing it and kept herself in line, until her eyes began to see the light inside the dark. Jane, you must go. We didn't know your quest would lead you down this road. We know you're searching and you've been giving, but now you've wandered off and you gotta wander home. Jen, we love you, but we can't have you. You must go. Jane was born with skin darker than her peers. Spent a cycle telling them the reasons for her fears. No one seemed to know or care about the past. Then they showed her where she stood with every vote they cast. And they said, Jane, thanks for your time, but there's no room for you when there's power on the line. We know you're hurting, but we're not listening. And we'd help you out, but we don't have that kind of time. So go work harder and you'll all be fine. You must go. So John and Jen and Jane were on the streets without a home, abandoned by the ones supposed to love and keep them warm. Then a voice fell on their ears, so familiar to their soul. And he said, child, don't you go. I want your broken heart and beautiful soul. I felt you hurting, I've seen you giving, and I'll stay right here till you have the power to stand. They may not want you, but I know